Hello IGN, and welcome to another installment of our Legend of Zelda timeline playthrough. I will be your host for this, Jose Otero, and I'm joined by...
Hey, how's it going? It's taken us a while to get this going, simply because we had to find everything, including link cables and all that, you know?
Yeah, sorry for the drop, ladies and gentlemen, but here we are, and curiously enough, it is very surprising when you look at the Hyrule Historia, you know, the chronological timeline for Zelda. They managed to cram in this.
Well, basically, the Four Swords adventures and Four Swords games, which are very different from the kind of the core Legend of Zelda games, right?
So for background, this came out in 2002 in North America, and then in Japan in 2003. It was worked on by Capcom because this game wasn't just Four Swords, but it included a port of A Link to the Past, which was a timeless classic by that point, right? Like, everyone sort of loved that game. So the chance to play it again on GPA was enticing to some folks.
And it was a cool project because not only did you get A Link to the Past with, you know, a couple of new sound effects taken from Ocarina of Time, but you got this entirely new experience that's the Four Swords, and it was multiplayer from the ground up. You could not play this as a single-player game. There was actually an anniversary edition, which we'll talk about in the future, re-released later that added a single-player mode, but this one didn't have that. So you needed to chain your Game Boy Advances together to play this with a friend, otherwise you could not experience it.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, according to Hyrule Historia, this is a prequel to the game, this game takes place after Minish Cap, but Minish Cap came out after this game. Which is really weird. So why don't we do some setup for story?
Well, this is where kind of like the timeline is trying to shoehorn some of these titles in, right, to make it work neatly. I mean, at the beginning of this game, in this game, you'll notice that Vati, who's the bad guy, just like in Minish Cap, actually has no idea who Link or Zelda are, even though the other game happened before, and so they had to kind of kludge it together and say, you know, he just forgets whatever.
No, it's true.
It's like it happened in Star Wars too. Remember, somebody wiped C-3PO's. They had to retroactively add all that.
That's
Anyways,
true.
So the setup for this game, you know, and you can see obviously two players collaborating here. What you're not seeing is sometimes one character's off screen, of course. That's because every player has their own screen. But so basically, Vati, the ex-Picori guy whom we talked about before, at the end of Minish Cap was defeated, right? But peace didn't last long. He reappears and he takes over the Palace of the Winds, and he sets out to kidnap Hyrule's young, fine women. And you know, of course, the moment the ladies are in peril, knights come out. They try to take him out and rescue the girls, but they all fail. So what happens, of course, is a legendary hero appears, and this is, I call this like the Legend of Link, right? It's a setup at the beginning of a lot of Zelda games where you see this Link hero doing something, but he's actually not the main subject in the game.
That's right, yeah.
Like, you hear about this legend of this hero, and then you play a hero who is like him and follows in his footsteps.
That's right, yeah.
That happens here too. You learn about this guy who split his body into four using this legendary Four Sword, and then defeats Vati and traps him in the sword and returns everything to peace. And then, of course, disappears, and we don't know what happens.
Yeah, and that's an interesting theme that carries through a lot of the Zelda games, as you pointed out, that there is a different Link, and therefore a different era, a different generation of a hero. And I think that's the most interesting thing about the Zelda myth is probably that, right? That it's never always the same guy.
Yep. And so, of course, everybody forgets about that legend, right? It's like some people still remember it, most people don't know it. It just passes into legend.
Yeah, but a couple of things get forgotten, too. Like, doesn't Vati forget something very important?
Well, yeah, but you can always argue that he was possessed, he was in a different form, and so forth. But yeah, it could be that the first story ties in neatly with Minish Cap, right? Like, there are all these elements that tie these games together. And we should say that, you know, Minish Cap, Four Swords, and Four Sword Adventures on the GameCube form this trilogy, right? They split timeline-wise, like the GameCube Four Swords Adventures happens after Twilight Princess. Four Swords is actually before Ocarina of Time.
That's right.
But, you know, they have this kind of storyline surrounding this new villain, Vati. And, you know, compared to Ganondorf and Ganon, I don't think he's as exciting. I
agree.
Would you say he's the lamest Zelda villain?
I would say he is absolutely the lamest Zelda villain. And it's weird because a lot of Zelda fans like to point out, well, some Zelda cynics even like to point out, why is it always Ganon? Well, the times they do depart from Ganon, it can get a little weird. And Vati is totally the embodiment of that. He's just not a very charismatic or interesting villain at that.
Sure, but
it's a big blob like a bat.
Majora's Mask is, or you know,
the
Twilight
only
Princess
time they got it. Well, yeah, that's true.
You know,
Majora's Mask specifically was the first time they got it right, where it wasn't anything had nothing to do with Ganon. And it was super interesting for its own reasons versus relying on the same myth and the same story being retold, essentially, right? Because that's what it boils down to.
Yep.
Just to talk a little bit about the talent on this game, so I think we mentioned at the top, Capcom handled this game, more specifically Flagship. Interestingly enough, this game was co-directed, so the Four Swords multiplayer mode, which came along with A Link to the Past, that whole package was co-directed by Yoichi Yamada, who you may recognize as one of the signature names in the Zelda series. He's worked on almost every one, and was, interestingly enough, the director of Zelda 2. And also you have Hidemaru Fujibayashi, which if you know your Zelda or if you've been paying attention to the series, he was the director on Skyward Sword. So this was one of his first projects as well, or before he would eventually kind of sit in the director's chair again to, work on a full 3D Zelda, as it were.
And then on the music side, I mean, obviously Link to the Past is some incredibly memorable memories. Right. Four Swords, however, is not the same.
No, and it's weird. So the composer...
It recycles a lot. It recycles a lot, but it's just not as good.
Yeah, the composer's name is Yuko Takahara, and to Yuko's career credit, she has worked on Mega Man 6 for the NES. She also worked on the Capcom Versus games, so Marvel vs. Capcom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and those had pretty catchy, pretty interesting music, but this game, for a lot of reasons, it just recycles. It feels really unremarkable. It doesn't really rely on sort of those classic themes that you hear. Mm-hmm. The argument could be made, how many times do you need to hear that over and over again? And that's fair, but at the same time, this is kind of a poor, I don't know, it just isn't really remarkable to me.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I think it's a good game. It's really fun to play, especially with 4 players, and it has all these puzzles surrounding the colors of the different links, right? Like, you need to pull enemies apart by pulling on the left and the right side. So it has really clever co-op puzzles.
Yeah, and to ride that wave a little bit, also, it's one of the more interesting co-op competitive games that Nintendo would then start to sort of sample with, right?
Yep.
Four Swords Adventures totally capitalized on that as well.
Yeah.
So overall, I think, it's just an interesting addition, again, to the timeline. We're back to that point a little bit. I'm surprised this made it in.
It was, it is. And let's talk a little bit more about the story.
Oh, yeah,
so
please.
What happens now is that, Zelda, again, is entrusted with a magical MacGuffin. In this case, it's the Four Sword, right? She looks after it, and then Vati reappears, kidnaps her, doesn't remember anything from Minish Cap, because it was released later. And he wants to basically marry her. She has to be his bride. So then Link gets advice from a fairy, pulls out the Four Sword, and the great fairies tell Link that they can get him to the Palace of Winds to take on Vati, but first he has to prove himself by defeating enemies and collecting rupees. So, not only does this game shift to a multiplayer setup, and it shifts to a random dungeon setup. Like, the overworld is always the same, but the dungeons are actually randomized, like in Mysterious Dungeon or some of these other Japanese franchises. But now the focus is on collecting a lot of money, which, happening in some of the Mario games, right?
That's right.
Mario game
New Super Mario Bros. 2, that was a thing. And I feel even money is a lot more important in A Link Between Worlds, to be fair as well, right? Because of how you need it to not only rent but then buy items so that you can then upgrade them.
Yep.
So it's interesting overall. It's also visually, it's pretty good looking. I gotta give it that. Yeah, for a game, what are we talking here? 2002, we said at the top of this thing. Really nice sprites, really well done. I think also this was a weird period for Nintendo where they were inserting a lot of their N64 sound samples into their games. Remember, we got the Yoshi's Island version where Yoshi stopped being silent, so it got 10 times more annoying.
Yeah.
But still, overall, it was interesting. Ooh. Player 1.
There you go.
Nice job.
You get ranked. I mean, this kind of feature actually made it made it into Nintendo core titles, right? Like Mario, for example. All the multiplayer Marios do this ranking against each other, where it's friendly competition all the way.
For sure.
But there is something to this game where it feels like somebody doing an impersonation of a Zelda game.
A cover
in a
band.
lot of ways,
Yeah,
right?
it totally feels like a cover band.
Take the fairies, for example. You have the fairies. One protects the forest and protects the sea of trees. There's an ice fairy, protects the Talus Cave, and there's a flame one protecting Death Mountain. It's like, it sounds sounds like the three goddesses, but it's slightly different. Everything is, you know, is related and similar, but not it. And I almost feel like when Nintendo set out with this, they said, "Oh, please don't make a game with Ganon because we have plans for that character. You know, do something different." And so maybe that
makes you think, doesn't it? Yeah.
Maybe there were some restrictions that Capcom had to work under to not take too much from the other storylines. And it's weird, like you start as little eggs. You know, like the designations of how good you are. It's like you're little eggs at first. You become brave heroes, then the greatest of heroes, and then, you know, as we've seen here before, the guys who are playing this got the silver key. So you get the keys to the Palace of Winds until you can finally face down Vati.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know, we're not going to show you, obviously, the last battle against Vati here, but, you know, needless to say, of course, the 4 links, or 2, get together and defeat Vati and rescue Zelda, and then Vati is again sealed into the 4 sword, and the sword goes back into the pedestal like in, you know, Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds. And then the links merge back into one, and Zelda keeps watch over the 4 sword again, and just kind of wraps up this way until, you know, the story is revisited again in the future.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's. I mean, so as you can see, you had to have 2 people to play minimum.
Yeah, and it would only let you watch the opening cutscene, and then it would say, "Well, you need more people. Come back later."
Yeah.
Right. So you had to get the game link cable and whatnot.
Yep. And then the setup is, you know, there's a boss room every 9 floors, so you battle your way through 9 floors, and then you face a boss. Yeah. And you can see there's some very familiar enemies here. God, I hate this music.
I told you.
Yeah, it's kind of like great.
Yeah,
enough.
it's just
anyways,
it doesn't really ever go anywhere.
So you'll see classic enemies like Moblins, Tektites, Octoroks, Wizrobes, Armos, all that kind of stuff. There's even a Bob-omb in it, you know, from the Mario franchise.
Oh, nice.
Bob-omb appears in it in Minish Cap 2, of course, later, you know, which came out 2 years after this one.
Okay.
There's the cool ones, the ones that are like party poppers, like the Hikun enemies you pull apart on the sides. I thought
those were fun
really cool.
bosses, yeah.
And then everybody's nemesis, the Rupee-like, of course.
Yeah, I think when they revisited this game, and it's interesting that then 4 Swords Adventurers will appear later in the timeline, but I do like that they kind of nailed a lot of these concepts and seem to have figured out a lot better, like how to implement it, better graphics, really cool plume effects, like stuff borrowed from Wind Waker. You don't see any of that here, of course. The only thing borrowed from Wind Waker really is the design of Link, you can argue, and also sort of that shout.
Yep.
But
there's some interesting parallels to the later Minish Cap too. Like you can get the Nat Hat, you know, which is like as low, like it shrinks you down. I think it was behind this wall somewhere. So sure. No, he's getting red. No. Hey, you guys got to both push. Jeez. Oh, actually no.
All right. Well,
I like that he gets red. By the way, that's a nice touch.
No, there are little touches like that, including like the sweat beads that come out when he's pulling and things like that.
And of course, not many Zelda games actually have jumping in them. You know, button-based jumping. So,
sure.
But this game also has the Pegasus boots. It has, of course, the shield and all that kind of stuff. But it also has some power-ups like armor seeds and razor seeds, where you double your attack power.
That's right. Or they make you run faster. Yeah, or walk
increase
faster,
your
walk
defensive
speed.
power. Yeah, Pegasus, you run faster. Exactly.
Well, it's all about that cash in this game. To be fair, like slicing down a lot of trees and getting a lot of this stuff was what sort of drove players to again be competitive.
The Nat Hat is behind there.
Yeah, that's it.
And then, you know, just like in the Mario titles too, the cooperative, like the panels where you step on a switch to go left or right, and you have to kind of work together to go in the right direction.
Yep.
And then one really unique thing in this is that depending on how you do, you get keys of different levels, right? You either get a silver, gold hero or no key at all, and that's based on how many rupees you get.
Yeah.
And you can actually progress through different quests in this game.
Yeah, and this is totally the Minish Cap reference here, right? There you go.
Yeah, they love that. And we should say that Minish Cap was already under works when this was being worked on, too. So, actually, because Nintendo needed this for Christmas 2002 or, needed a holiday game, they had Capcom pause development of Minish Cap to actually finish this one.
That's right.
But so, there's an interesting tie, too, right? There's a link between this 4 Swords game and A Link to the Past. Do you remember that?
No,
so
I don't. That's why I'm looking at you like,
so
what?
If you get 10 medals, you actually unlock the Riddle Quest in the Game Boy Advance Link to the Past. So, like, if you do well in this one, in A Link to the Past, they added this thing where you go talk to the brother of the Lumberjacks.
Okay.
Q Bumpkin. You know, the other guys were A Bumpkin and B Bumpkin.
I remember.
So yeah, it's Q Bumpkin, and he gives you a riddle, and then you have to basically, based on the riddle, you have to go catch the creature in question. And if you get solve 10 of the riddles, you get the hurricane spin.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they actually redid that. When the anniversary version came out, the Hurricane Spin and the Master Swords are found in 2 new stages instead, right?
Okay.
Because they didn't have Link to the Past built into it.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about this game is if you die, and you know these guys, to be quite honest, obviously our players haven't played this game in many years,
so
so
they're doing the best they can.
Cut them some slack.
Respect.
But if you get knocked out, you actually have to pay to be revived, and if you're out of rupees, it's game over. So
yeah, that's right.
Different little element.
For sure.
And then there were 3 playthroughs as well, if you remember. There was one, there was the first epic where you collect 1,000 rupees to get the silver keys. The second epic, stages get harder, you have to collect 3,000 rupees. Final epic, that's when you need to collect 5,000 rupees per stage and get the hero's keys. So, and the same way, Vati's Palace actually has 4 different boss battles. So very much a game where the setup is kind of, it's more competition-based, it's more about repeat play, getting together with your friends, and if you've already played it before, you just get better and better and unlock, like, the harder challenges. I think that was a really cool setup.
No, for sure. Yeah, and, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. This got re-released a couple of years back now, actually, around the time of Skyward Sword and the 25th anniversary. It was a free download for a limited time, and now it's completely gone from the eShop. It was compatible with DSi and also 3DS.
Yeah, but in order to play the original version, which has all the tie-ins with Link to the Past, you of course have to break out 2 Game Boy Advances at least, and you have to have 2 copies of the game, and you have to have a Link cable. So
which we learned this afternoon, and it took us a while to find.
If you want to revisit the game like we did here,
and if you play the 25th anniversary version, there is a single-player mode, so that's cool, right? You have another character that will just follow you around, and then you can possess him to do what you need to do. Great. Right. Yeah. Well, so this is back. The Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia playthrough.
Yeah, I think it's. I hope we are the first.
We're back on track.
The first playthrough by storyline, and of course, Link Between Worlds just came out, so we have to figure out where exactly that game fits.
And it's going to come up real soon after we do the next episode, which will be Ocarina of Time.
Yep.
After that, we'll end up at A Link to the Past, and then quickly it'll be descending into that.
So if you enjoy these, these playthroughs, want to learn more about Nintendo history and Legend of Zelda and all that, check out our podcast, Nintendo Voice Chat, NVC. You can download it on iTunes, or you can find it on IGN. Just search for NVC. And if you have feedback and you want to let us know something, you can always email us at nvc@ign.com as well. And we actually answer questions on the air on our podcast as well.
Awesome. So this project is back on track. Look forward to another episode in a week or so. And thanks again for checking this out.
Goodbye.